The autumn wind carried dust through the narrow streets of Grass Valley, California, and Penelope Turner stood outside Morrison's general store with her hands trembling and her pride in tatters, wondering how she would feed her younger sister tonight. The year was 1876, and the gold rush had long since faded from these hills, leaving behind stubborn folk who scratched their living from the unforgiving earth. Penelope had arrived 3 months prior with her sister Dorothy, after their parents succumbed to cholera back in Missouri. At 22, she had taken on the responsibility of caring for her 15-year-old sister, and the weight of that burden pressed heavier with each passing day. She clutched the short list in her hand, the pencil marks nearly worn away from how many times she had revised it, cutting items until only the barest necessities remained. Flour, salt, a small portion of salt pork, coffee if any coins remained. Her teaching position at the newly established schoolhouse would not pay until the end of the month, still 2 weeks away, and their cupboards had grown desperately bare. Taking a deep breath, Penelope pushed open the door, and the small bell above jingled cheerfully, a sound that felt mocking given her circumstances. The store smelled of leather and tobacco, molasses and sawdust. Mr. Morrison stood behind the counter, his substantial belly pressed against the wood as he counted coins from another customer's purchase. "Good afternoon, Mr. Morrison," Penelope said, willing her voice to remain steady. The merchant looked up, and something shifted in his expression when he saw her, not quite hostile but certainly not welcoming. "Miss Turner." She approached the counter and set down her list. "I need these items, please. I can pay you at month's end when I receive my salary from the school board." Mr. Morrison did not even glance at the list. He folded his thick arms across his chest and shook his head slowly. "I am afraid I cannot do that, Miss Turner. I beg your pardon. Your credit is no good here," he said flatly. "You have been in town for 3 months and have no established history, no family to vouch for you, no property. I am running a business, not a charity." Heat flooded Penelope's cheeks. 2 other customers had entered the store behind her, and she felt their eyes boring into her back. "Mr. Morrison, I am employed. I am the schoolteacher. Surely my position means nothing if you cannot pay your debts," he interrupted. "The last teacher we had left town owing money to half the merchants here. I will sell you goods for cash, but I will not extend credit." Penelope's throat tightened. She had exactly 37 cents in her reticule, barely enough for a pound of flour. "I understand," she managed to say, though understanding did nothing to fill her stomach or her sister's. She turned to leave, blinking rapidly against the burning in her eyes. She would not cry in front of these people. She would not give them that satisfaction. "Hold on there." The voice came from the back of the store, deep and rough as gravel shifting underfoot. Penelope turned to see a man rising from where he had been examining a display of steel traps. He was enormous, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span half the width of the aisle. His hair was dark brown and fell past his collar, somewhat shaggy but clean. He wore buckskin trousers and a heavy wool shirt that could not quite conceal the powerful muscles of his chest and arms. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but his eyes were startling in their clarity, a pale gray blue that reminded her of winter skies. He walked toward the counter with an easy, rolling gait, and Penelope instinctively stepped back. Men like this, mountain men who came down from the high country to trade their furs and stock up on supplies, they were unpredictable, wild, dangerous even. "Harrison Garrett," Mr. Morrison said, his tone noticeably more respectful. "What can I do for you?" The mountain man Harrison Garrett ignored the merchant and looked directly at Penelope. His gaze was intense but not unkind, assessing her with a directness that made her want to look away, though she forced herself to hold his stare. "You need supplies?" he asked her. Penelope's fingers tightened on her reticule. "That is my concern, sir." Sounds like it is Morrison's concern too, and he does not seem inclined to help. Harrison turned to the merchant. "Open an account under my name. She can buy anything she needs." The words hung in the air like something solid, and for a moment Penelope could not quite process what she had heard. Mr. Morrison's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "You want to guarantee her credit?" the merchant asked. "That is what I just said, isn't it?" Harrison's tone carried an edge that made Morrison straighten behind his counter. "Yes, of course, Mr. Garrett. Your credit is always good here. If you are willing to stand for her debts, I am." Harrison pulled out a leather purse that clinked heavily with coins. He counted out bills onto the counter. "Here is $50. That should more than cover what she needs today and whatever else she might require over the coming weeks. When she pays you at month's end, you can credit it back to my account." Mr. Morrison's entire demeanor had transformed. He swept up the money and nodded eagerly. "Of course, Mr. Garrett. Absolutely. Miss Turner, my apologies for the earlier confusion. What can I get for you?" Penelope's mind reeled. She looked from the mountain man to the merchant and back again. "I cannot accept this," she said, though her heart hammered with desperate hope. "I do not even know you, sir." Harrison shrugged, the movement making the fabric of his shirt strain across his broad shoulders. "You know me now, Harrison Garrett. I trap in the high country, sell my furs here twice a year. Morrison knows I am good for it." He gestured at her list, still lying on the counter. "Get what you need. Consider it neighborly hospitality." "This is more than neighborly hospitality." "This is—" Penelope struggled for words. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" For the first time, something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Harrison's mouth beneath his beard. "Maybe I do not like seeing a woman put in a difficult position when I can help. Maybe I have sisters of my own and would hope someone would do the same for them. Does the why matter so much?" It did and it did not. Penelope's pride warred with the very real needs that had driven her to the store in the first place. Dorothy was waiting at home, probably reading one of the 3 books they owned for the dozenth time, trying to ignore the gnawing in her belly. "I will pay you back," Penelope said firmly. "Every cent, with interest if you require it." "No interest," Harrison said. "Just pay Morrison when you get your salary. He will settle with me." He touched the brim of his hat. "Good day, Miss Turner." He moved past her toward the door, and Penelope caught the scent of pine and wood smoke and leather. Something about him seemed solid and real in a way that the rest of her precarious new life did not. "Wait," she called out. "How did you know my name?" Harrison paused at the door and glanced back. "Small town. Everybody knows the new schoolteacher." Then he was gone, the bell jingling in his wake. Penelope stood frozen for another moment before Mr. Morrison cleared his throat. "Your list, Miss Turner." She approached the counter again, her legs feeling strangely unsteady. "Yes, thank you." She smoothed out the creased paper. "I will need these items." Mr. Morrison transformed into an eager assistant, pulling down goods from shelves and measuring out portions with sudden generosity. "Finest flour we have," he announced. "And this salt pork is fresh from last week's butchering. How much coffee would you like?" "A pound," Penelope said, still feeling dazed. "And if you have any dried apples, a small portion of those as well." "Certainly, certainly." Morrison bustled about, wrapping items in brown paper and twine. "Mr. Garrett is a good man. Known him 5 years now, ever since he started coming down from the mountains to trade. Always pays his debts, never causes trouble. You are fortunate he was here today." Fortunate felt like an inadequate word. Penelope felt, as though some force of nature had swept through the store and rearranged her entire world in the span of 5 minutes. She accepted the parcels Morrison piled into her arms, thanked him, and stepped back out into the autumn sunshine. The street was busier now, with wagons rumbling past and people going about their afternoon business. Penelope looked up and down, but there was no sign of the tall mountain man with his piercing gray-blue eyes. She wondered if she had imagined the entire encounter, but the weight of the supplies in her arms proved otherwise. She hurried home to the small cabin she and Dorothy rented at the edge of town. It was a humble dwelling, just 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but it was theirs, and she had begun to think of it as home. Dorothy met her at the door, her thin face lighting up when she saw the parcels. "You got everything?" Dorothy asked, taking some of the packages. "I was worried when you were gone so long." "There was a complication," Penelope said, setting the supplies on their rough wooden table. "And then a solution." She told Dorothy what had happened while they unpacked the goods, her sister's eyes growing wider with each detail. "A mountain man just paid for all this, out of nowhere, apparently so." "Why would he do that?" Penelope shook her head. "I cannot fathom, but I intend to repay him the moment I receive my salary." She measured coffee into their grinder, the rich smell filling the small cabin. "We will eat properly tonight for the first time in a week." Dorothy hugged her suddenly, fiercely. "You always take care of me, Penny, always." Penelope held her sister close, feeling the thinness of her shoulders through the worn fabric of her dress. "Always," she promised. That evening, they had salt pork fried with the last of their potatoes, fresh bread Penelope baked from the new flour, and coffee sweetened with a precious bit of sugar. It was a feast by their recent standards, and Dorothy's cheeks had color in them again by the time they finished. After her sister went to bed, Penelope sat by the small window and looked out at the darkening mountains that rose beyond the town. Somewhere up there, Harrison Garrett was presumably making camp for the night, cooking his own supper over a fire, completely unaware of how thoroughly he had disrupted her thoughts. She was not a woman who took charity easily. She had learned self-reliance early, when their father's drinking had made him unreliable, and then his death had made her the head of their small family. The idea of being indebted to anyone, let alone a stranger, sat uncomfortably in her chest. Yet there had been something in Harrison Garrett's eyes when he looked at her. Not pity, which she could not have borne. Something else. Recognition, perhaps, as though he understood what it meant to be proud and struggling and in need of help one could not ask for. She would pay him back, she vowed. Every cent. And then they would be even, and she would never have to feel this strange mixture of gratitude and confusion again. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Penelope threw herself into her teaching with renewed vigor, grateful to have food in her stomach, and able to focus on her 17 students rather than the constant gnawing of hunger. The children ranged from 6 to 14, a mix of miners' children and those from the few farming families that had staked claims in the valley. They were rough and often unruly, but Penelope had learned that firmness mixed with genuine care could win over even the most reluctant scholar. She asked around town about Harrison Garrett, trying to be subtle but probably failing. The picture that emerged was of a solitary man, 30 years old, who had come west 8 years prior from somewhere back east. He spent most of his time in the high country, trapping and hunting, coming to town only twice a year to sell his furs and stock up on the supplies he could not make or catch for himself. He had a claim up in the mountains, a cabin he had built with his own hands, and a reputation for being fair in his dealings and formidable if crossed. Saw him knock out a man twice in a saloon once. Old Pete the blacksmith told her when she stopped by to have a loose nail fixed on her boot heel. Fellow was roughing up one of the saloon girls. Harrison picked him up like he weighed nothing and threw him clear through the doorway into the street. Told him if he saw him lay hands on a woman again, he would not be so gentle next time. He sounds quite violent, Penelope said, though something in her chest tightened at the image. Pete shook his head. Protective, I would say. He does not look for fights, but he does not walk away from injustice either. We could use more men like him, truth be told. Penelope did not see Harrison again for over a week. She began to wonder if he had returned to his mountain cabin, his brief appearance in her life just an odd moment that would fade to a strange memory. She received her salary from the school board and immediately went to Morrison's general store to settle her account. That comes to $7.40, Morrison told her after consulting his ledger. Penelope counted out the coins carefully. And the balance of Mr. Garrett's credit. Oh, he settled that himself yesterday. Said you were only to pay for what you actually took, not the full amount he put down. That was not our arrangement, Penelope protested. He paid $50. I should reimburse him for the full amount. Morrison shrugged. Take it up with him, Miss Turner. I just do what the man says. He is not someone I care to argue with. Frustrated, Penelope left the store with a substantial portion of her salary still in her purse and no way to return Harrison Garrett's generosity. She could not simply ride up into the mountains to find him. She had no idea where his cabin was, and even if she did, it would be wildly inappropriate for her to seek out a bachelor in such an isolated setting. She was mulling over this problem while walking back toward her cabin when she nearly collided with the man himself. Harrison was coming out of the livery stable, leading a large bay pack horse loaded with supplies. He was dressed much as before, his hair tied back with a leather cord, his powerful frame making the heavy pack on the horse look insignificant. Mr. Garrett, Penelope said, stopping short. He looked up and seemed genuinely pleased to see her. Miss Turner, how are you faring? Well, thank you. Better, certainly, than when we first met. She straightened her shoulders. I just came from Morrison's store. He said you forgave a substantial portion of the credit you extended. Harrison secured the packhorse's lead and gave her his full attention. You needed $7 worth of supplies. I saw no reason for you to repay money you did not use. That is generous, but it was not necessary. I am prepared to honor the full amount. Are you arguing with me about giving you less debt to repay? A hint of amusement colored his rough voice. I am arguing with you about changing our agreement without consulting me. Fair enough. Harrison studied her for a long moment, and Penelope felt that intensity again, as though he could see through her carefully maintained composure to the frightened, proud woman beneath. Tell you what. You can buy me supper at the boarding house, and we will call it even. Penelope blinked. Supper? I am heading back up to my claim tomorrow morning and could use a decent meal before I go. Mrs. Chen at the boarding house sets a good table. Have supper with me and your debt is cleared. It was improper, of course. An unmarried woman having supper alone with an unmarried man. But then, everything about their interaction had been unconventional from the start, and she desperately wanted to clear this obligation that hung between them. Very well, Penelope agreed. What time? 6 o'clock. I will meet you there. Harrison touched his hat brim again in that gesture she was beginning to recognize as his version of a formal goodbye, and led his packhorse down the street toward the assayer's office. Penelope watched him go, already wondering what she had agreed to. That evening, she dressed with more care than usual, choosing her best dress, a dark green wool that brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes. She told Dorothy she was having supper with someone who had helped them, which was true enough, and tried to ignore her sister's knowing smile. The boarding house dining room was half full when Penelope arrived. mostly miners and traveling salesmen staying the night before moving on. Mrs. Chen greeted her warmly and showed her to a table near the window where Harrison was already waiting. He had cleaned up, his hair still damp and slicked back, his beard trimmed. He wore a clean shirt, still wool but newer than the one he had worn before, and he stood when she approached the table in a gesture of courtesy that surprised her. "Miss Turner," he said, pulling out her chair. "Mr. Garrett." She settled into the seat, hyper-aware of his presence as he returned to his own chair across from her. Up close, she could see that his face was weathered from years in the elements, with small scars here and there that spoke of a hard life. But his eyes remained striking, and when they focused on her, she felt like the only person in the room. Mrs. Chen brought them beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie, along with strong coffee. For a few minutes, they ate in comfortable silence. The food was excellent, hearty and well-seasoned, and Penelope realized she was genuinely enjoying herself. "How long have you been teaching?" Harrison asked eventually. 3 months here, but I taught for 2 years in Missouri before my parents passed." Penelope broke off a piece of bread. "I always wanted to teach. My mother was a school teacher before she married, and she educated me well enough that I could sit for the certificate. Your parents would be proud, I imagine, taking care of your sister starting fresh in a new place. That takes courage." "Or desperation," Penelope said, then wished she had not. It sounded too raw, too honest, but Harrison nodded. "Sometimes they are the same thing. I came west after my father died. He had debts I could not pay, and I was about to lose everything. Figured I could start over out here, make something of myself," he gestured vaguely. 8 years later, I am still here. Do you like it? Living in the mountains alone?" Harrison considered the question seriously. "I do. It suits me. There is a peace up there you cannot find around people. Everything is simple, honest. You work hard, you survive. You make mistakes, you pay for them. No pretense." "It sounds lonely," Penelope said softly. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Especially in winter when the snows come and you can go weeks without seeing another soul. But then spring arrives, and it is like the whole world is being born again, and you are the only one there to witness it." He looked almost embarrassed by his own eloquence. "I am not explaining it well. No, I understand, or I think I do." Penelope traced the rim of her coffee cup. "There is something appealing about simplicity. My life has been complicated for so long, with my father's problems and then his death, the journey west, establishing ourselves here. Sometimes I dream about a quiet place where nothing is expected of me except to exist." "Is teaching what you want to do? Not just what you have to do?" The question struck deeper than Penelope expected. "I love the children," she said slowly. "I love seeing them learn, watching their faces when something suddenly makes sense that confused them before. But do I want to spend my whole life in a one-room schoolhouse, teaching the same lessons year after year? I do not know. What choices do I have? I am unmarried with a dependent sister. Teaching is respectable work that pays enough to live on, barely. That has to be enough. Does it?" Harrison's gaze was steady on hers. "Have to be enough, I mean. What alternative is there? That is a question only you can answer." They talked through the rest of the meal, the conversation flowing more easily than Penelope would have imagined. Harrison was surprisingly well-spoken when he chose to be, with observations about the world that suggested he thought deeply about things during his long, solitary months. He asked about her teaching, seemed genuinely interested in her students, and told her stories about the mountains that made them come alive in her imagination. When they finished the apple pie, Harrison insisted on walking her home, despite her protests that it was barely dark and Grass Valley was safe enough. "Humor me," he said, and there was something in his tone that suggested he would not be argued with on this point. They walked slowly through the cooling evening, and Penelope found herself wishing her cabin was farther away, that this strange, peaceful interlude could continue. When they reached her door, she turned to face him. "Thank you for supper, Mr. Garrett, and for everything else. Your kindness meant more than you probably realize." Harrison was quiet for a moment, and in the lamplight spilling from her window, his expression was difficult to read. "I am glad I could help. You take care of yourself, Miss Turner, and that sister of yours." "I will." "Safe travels back to your cabin." He touched his hat brim one last time and turned to go. Penelope watched until he disappeared into the darkness, then went inside where Dorothy was waiting with a dozen questions about where she had been and who this mysterious benefactor really was. Penelope answered as best she could, but the truth was, she was not entirely sure herself. Harrison Garrett was unlike any man she had ever met, and she could not quite sort out what she felt about that. The weeks that followed were busy with the routines of teaching and managing their small household. November brought colder weather, and Penelope was grateful for the supplies she had been able to purchase, which stretched further than she had dared hope. She received her second month's salary and was able to set aside a small amount in savings, a luxury she had not enjoyed in years. She thought about Harrison more than she cared to admit, even to herself. She wondered what he was doing up in his mountain cabin, whether the snows had started yet at higher elevations, if he was lonely or content. She told herself she was simply curious about someone who had helped her, but in quiet moments, she acknowledged it was more than that. Something about Harrison had gotten under her skin, his quiet strength, the way he had helped her without making her feel small or pitied, the intelligence in his eyes and the gentleness in his manner, despite his intimidating size. She found herself measuring other men against him and finding them wanting. It was foolish, she told herself. She had spoken with the man twice. She knew almost nothing about him. And even if there were something between them, some spark of connection, what future could there be? He lived in the mountains as a solitary trapper. She was a schoolteacher with a dependent sister. Their worlds did not align. Still, when she saw him again in late November, her heart jumped in a way that had nothing to do with surprise and everything to do with anticipation. She was in Morrison's store, purchasing thread and a packet of needles, when Harrison came in carrying a stack of prime beaver pelts. He wore a heavy coat now, and his beard was fuller, but she would have known him anywhere. Their eyes met across the store, and Harrison's face brightened in a way that made her breath catch. "Miss Turner," he said, crossing to her with those long strides, "this is a pleasant surprise. Mr. Garrett, I thought you had returned to your claim." "I did. Came back down for more supplies and to check on some business." He glanced at Morrison, who was examining the pelts with an expert eye, and to see how certain people were faring. Penelope felt heat rise in her cheeks. "We are doing well, quite well actually. I am glad to hear it." Harrison hesitated, and she saw something uncertain flicker in his expression, so out of place on such a confident man that it made him suddenly more human. "Would you walk with me? I promise not to take much of your time." She should say no. She had lessons to prepare, and Dorothy would be expecting her. But she found herself nodding, paying for her items, and following Harrison out into the crisp afternoon. They walked to the edge of town where the land opened up into meadows, now brown with late autumn. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already white with snow. Harrison seemed to be gathering his thoughts, and Penelope waited, more nervous than she wanted to admit. "I have been thinking," Harrison began, then stopped. "That is, I wanted to ask you something, but I am not entirely sure how." "Simply asking usually works," Penelope said gently. He huffed a small laugh. Direct, I like that about you. He turned to face her fully. The truth is, I have not been able to stop thinking about you since we met. About our conversation at the boarding house. About how you carry yourself, proud and determined despite your difficulties. About how you love your sister enough to give up everything to care for her. Penelope's heart was hammering now. Mr. Garrett, let me finish, please, because I am making a mess of this. Harrison ran a hand through his hair. I am not good with words, not like this. I am better with actions. But what I am trying to say is that I would like to call on you properly. Court you if you would allow it. The world seemed to tilt slightly. Court me. I know it seems sudden. I know we have only spoken a few times. But I am 30 years old, Miss Turner, and I have never felt about anyone the way I find myself feeling about you. I cannot explain it better than that. Penelope stared at him, her mind racing. A dozen practical objections rose up. He lived in the mountains. She had responsibilities. They barely knew each other. It was too fast, too unexpected, too everything. But underneath all of that, singing through her like a pure note, was a single word: yes. I do not understand this, she said honestly. I do not understand what is happening between us or why, but I cannot stop thinking about you either. When I saw you today, I felt something I have not felt in longer than I can remember. What did you feel? Harrison's voice was rough, urgent. Happy, Penelope said simply. I felt happy. He stepped closer, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. This close, she could see the patterns of color in his eyes, gray and blue and silver all mixed together. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, solid and real. Then may I call on you, he asked, properly with your permission? Yes, Penelope said. Yes, you may. The smile that broke across Harrison's face transformed it entirely. He looked younger, lighter, and she found herself smiling back just as widely. I should warn you, she added. I come with complications. Dorothy is my responsibility and she always will be. I cannot and will not abandon her. I would never ask you to, Harrison said. Family is important. I understand that. And I have my teaching position. I need the income, at least until Dorothy is older and able to support herself. I am not asking you to give up anything, Penelope. The sound of her name in his mouth sent a shiver through her. I am only asking for the chance to know you better. To see if what we both feel has the potential to grow into something lasting. It was the most reasonable, respectful proposal of courtship she could have imagined, and yet it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, preparing to jump. Then we have an understanding, Penelope said. Though I should warn you, the people in this town will talk. Let them talk. I have never much cared about gossip. They walked back toward town together, and when they parted ways at her cabin, Harrison took her hand and pressed it gently, a gesture that felt more intimate than it had any right to be. I will be in town for 3 days, he said. May I see you again tomorrow? I teach until 3. You could come by the schoolhouse if you like. Meet my students. Harrison looked surprised. You would want that. If you are going to court me, you should see what my life actually looks like. Then I will be there at 3. Penelope watched him walk away, her hand still tingling where he had held it. Inside, Dorothy looked up from the mending she was working on and immediately set it aside. What happened? Her sister demanded. You look different. Penelope touched her cheeks, which felt warm. Do I? Yes. You look happy, genuinely happy. Dorothy crossed to her. It is him, is it not, the mountain man? His name is Harrison Garrett. And Penelope could not keep the smile from her face. And he is going to court me. Dorothy squealed and hugged her, and Penelope laughed, feeling young and hopeful in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. The next afternoon, Harrison appeared at the schoolhouse at precisely 3 o'clock. Penelope's students, who had been filing out, stopped and stared at the enormous man filling the doorway. One of the younger children actually hid behind an older girl. "Hello," Harrison said, his deep voice gentler than usual. "I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all," Penelope assured him. She gestured to the remaining students. "Children, this is Mr. Garrett. He lives in the mountains and works as a trapper." That broke the spell of fear. Suddenly, a dozen voices called out questions. What animals did he trap? Had he ever seen a bear? Did Indians live up in the mountains? Was it true? He had killed a mountain lion with his bare hands. Harrison fielded the questions with surprising patience, and Penelope watched as he crouched down to speak to the smaller children at their level, making himself less intimidating. He told them stories about the wildlife he encountered, describing the mountains in ways that had even the most restless students hanging on his every word. When the last child finally left, chattering excitedly about the mountain man at their school, Harrison straightened and looked at Penelope. "You are good with them," she said. "Children are honest. I appreciate that." He walked around the classroom, examining the slate board where she had written arithmetic problems, the carefully arranged desks, the collection of books on her small shelf. "You have made this into a real school. It must have looked rough when you started." It was a storage shed that the town council decided to convert. I spent the first week scrubbing and organizing before I could even think about teaching. Penelope leaned against her desk. "Why did you really come today?" "I know it was not just to meet my students." Harrison turned to face her. "I wanted to see you in your element, to understand what matters to you, and I wanted you to see that I can fit into your world at least a little, that I am not just some wild man from the mountains." "I never thought you were." "No." He moved closer. "What did you think?" Penelope considered her answer carefully. "I thought you were someone who had been hurt and went to the mountains to heal. I thought you were stronger than most people, not just physically but in here." She touched her own chest. "I thought you were someone who understood what it meant to be alone and had made peace with it, but I also thought you might be lonely, whether you admitted it or not." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "You see clearly, Penelope Turner. And am I wrong?" "No," he admitted. "You are not wrong about any of it." He reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear, his calloused fingers incredibly gentle. "I came west to escape my father's debts and my own failures. I thought if I could just get far enough away, into country wild enough, I could outrun my past. And in some ways I did. But you are right that I have been lonely. I just did not realize how lonely until I met you." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Penelope felt her eyes sting with unexpected tears. "I understand that feeling more than you know. Then maybe we can be lonely together, which is another way of saying not lonely at all." Penelope laughed through her tears. "That is terrible poetry. I warned you I was not good with words." "You are better than you think." They stood close in the empty schoolhouse, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows and painting everything gold. Harrison cupped her face with one large hand, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "I am falling for you," he said quietly. "I know it is too soon to say such things, but I believe in honesty, and that is the honest truth." "I am falling for you too," Penelope whispered. "It terrifies me. Me too. But maybe the best things are supposed to be a little terrifying." He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and kissed her softly. His lips were warm and surprisingly gentle, and Penelope felt the kiss all the way to her toes. When they parted, she was breathless. "That was my first kiss," she admitted. Harrison looked stunned. "Truly." "Is that so surprising? I have spent the last few years caring for my family. Romance was not exactly a priority." "Then I am honored." He kissed her forehead. "And I promise to make every one that follows just as special." They spent the rest of the afternoon together, walking through town and talking about everything and nothing. Harrison told her about his cabin, describing it so vividly she could almost see it. A single room with a sleeping loft, a stone fireplace he had built rock by rock, windows that looked out over a valley where elk grazed in the mornings, a creek nearby that ran cold and clear year-round, meadows that exploded with wildflowers in spring. "It sounds beautiful," Penelope said wistfully. "You should see it. When the weather turns warmer, I could take you up there. You and Dorothy both, if that would be more proper." The idea of seeing Harrison's world, the place he had chosen to make his sanctuary, filled Penelope with excitement. "I would like that very much." Over the following days, they saw each other as often as possible. Harrison met Dorothy, who was initially shy but warmed to him when he treated her as an intelligent person rather than a child. He brought them venison from a deer he had shot, teaching Penelope how to prepare it properly. They had supper together again at the boarding house, this time with Dorothy joining them, and Mrs. Chen beamed at them like a proud mother hen. On Harrison's last night in town before he had to return to his claim, he and Penelope sat on the small bench outside her cabin, bundled against the cold. Stars blazed overhead in the clear mountain sky. "I wish I did not have to go back," Harrison said, his arm around her shoulders. "But I have traps to check and a winter's worth of work to do." "I know, and I have my teaching, but I will miss you." Penelope leaned against his solid warmth. "When will you come back?" "I will try to make it down before the deep snows come, maybe in another month. And then definitely after the new year." He turned to look at her. "Can you be patient with me? With this situation, I know it is not conventional." "Nothing about us has been conventional from the start," Penelope said. "And yes, I can be patient. What we have is worth waiting for." Harrison kissed her then, deeper than before, and Penelope felt the promise in it. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to marry you someday, Penelope Turner. I hope you know that. We have known each other less than a month." "Does not matter. I know what I know, but I will wait as long as you need. Court you properly, make sure you are certain." "I am already certain," Penelope said, "but I appreciate your patience." The next morning, she and Dorothy stood outside their cabin and watched Harrison ride out of town, his pack-horse loaded with supplies. He turned back once to wave, and Penelope waved back, her heart aching even as it felt full. "You really love him," Dorothy said. "I really do. That was fast." "Yes, but that does not make it less real." Dorothy slipped her hand into Penelope's. "I am happy for you, Penny. You deserve to be happy." The weeks until Harrison returned stretched long. Penelope threw herself into her teaching, preparing her students for the winter lessons that would continue even as the weather worsened. She received a letter from Harrison in early December, brought down by another trapper who was stocking up for winter. The letter was short but heartfelt, expressing how much he missed her and promising to return as soon as he could safely leave his claim. Penelope wrote back, sealing her letter with the trapper who promised to deliver it on his way back to the high country. She told Harrison about her students, about Dorothy's progress in the advanced lessons Penelope taught her at home, about how the town was preparing for Christmas. She told him she missed him, that she thought of him constantly, that she was counting the days until he returned. The first serious snow came in mid-December, and with it, Harrison. He arrived on a gray morning, riding a large roan horse and leading his familiar bay pack-horse. Snow dusted his shoulders and clung to his beard, but his eyes were bright when he found her at the schoolhouse during the lunch break. "You came," Penelope said, running to him without caring who saw. He caught her up in his arms, lifting her clear off the ground. "I told you I would." She laughed, giddy with relief and joy. "I was worried the snow would keep you away. It would take more than snow to keep me from you." He set her down carefully. "How have you been?" Better now that you are here." They spent every possible moment together over the next several days. Harrison had brought Christmas gifts, a beautiful fur muff for Penelope and a pair of finely crafted mittens for Dorothy. In turn, Penelope gave him a scarf she had knitted in secret, working on it by lamplight after Dorothy went to bed on Christmas Eve. Harrison asked Penelope to walk with him, and they made their way to the small church at the center of town. The building was decorated with pine boughs and candles glowed in the windows. "I am not much of a church-going man," Harrison admitted, "but I believe in some things being sacred, and I wanted to ask you this in a sacred place." Penelope's heart began to race. "Harrison." He took both her hands in his. "I know we have not been courting long. I know most people would say it is too soon, but I am not most people and neither are you. I know my heart, Penelope. I know that I want to spend my life with you. I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want to build a future together, whatever that looks like, so I am asking you here and now to marry me." Tears spilled down Penelope's cheeks. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." Harrison pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the candlelight. "It was my grandmother's. My mother gave it to me before I left home, said to save it for someone special. I think she would have loved you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Penelope stared at it, this tangible symbol of promises and futures and love. "I have conditions," she said, looking up at him. "Name them. Dorothy comes with us. I will not abandon her, of course. She is your family, which makes her my family. And I want to keep teaching, at least for a while, at least until Dorothy is older." Harrison frowned slightly. "That is more complicated. My cabin is a hard day's ride from here. There is no school up there. Then we will figure it out. Maybe I can teach during the school year and come to the cabin in summers. Or maybe we find a way to make it work differently. But I need to know you support my work, that you do not expect me to just give up everything." "I support you completely," Harrison said, "and we will figure it out together. I have some ideas, actually, but we can discuss them later. Right now, I just want to celebrate the fact that you agreed to marry me." He kissed her then, and Penelope felt the future opening up before them, uncertain but full of possibility. They were married in late January, a small ceremony at the church with Dorothy standing up for Penelope and a trapper friend of Harrison's named Jack serving as his witness. Mrs. Chen provided the wedding supper, and half the town turned out to celebrate despite the cold weather. Penelope wore a dress she had refashioned from her mother's wedding gown, cream-colored silk with lace at the collar. Harrison wore new black trousers and a vest, his hair neatly trimmed, his beard shaped. When he saw her walking down the aisle, his face filled with such open love and joy that Penelope felt her own eyes overflow. They spoke their vows clearly, promising to love and honor each other through whatever challenges came. When the minister pronounced them married, Harrison kissed her softly, and the small congregation cheered. The solution to their living situation came from an unexpected source. At the wedding supper, Albert Sutherland, one of the wealthier mine owners who served on the town council, approached them. "Mrs. Garrett," he said, clearly pleased to use Penelope's new name, "my congratulations to you both." "Thank you, Mr. Sutherland. I have a proposition for you if you will hear it." Sutherland glanced at Harrison, who nodded permission for him to continue. "I own several properties in town, including a house that has been sitting empty since the previous owner returned east. It is fully furnished, 3 bedrooms with a small barn out back. I would be willing to let you stay there, rent-free, in exchange for you continuing as our school teacher." Penelope's mind raced. "That is extraordinarily generous. It is pragmatic. Good teachers are hard to find, and you are the best we have had." The children have learned more in the past 4 months than they did in the previous 2 years combined. I have a daughter in your class, and the change in her abilities has been remarkable." Sutherland looked at Harrison. "I know you have your claim in the mountains, but perhaps you could split your time. Stay here during the school months, return to your trapping in the summer." Harrison was quiet, thinking, "I could make that work. I have been considering whether full-time trapping is still what I want anyway. I could stay here, perhaps do some guide work for hunters and prospectors, keep my claim as a summer place." "Would that be acceptable to you?" Penelope asked him quietly. "I know how much the mountains mean to you." "You mean more," Harrison said simply. "The mountains will always be there. But building a life with you, being part of a community, being present for you and Dorothy, that is more important than my solitary comfort." Penelope turned back to Sutherland. "We accept your generous offer. Thank you." The house Sutherland provided was indeed lovely, much larger and nicer than the cabin they had been renting. It had real glass windows, a good stove, and enough space that Dorothy could have her own room. They moved in a week after the wedding, and Penelope marveled at how quickly her life had transformed. She was married. She had a home. She had security and love, and a future that felt stable for the first time since her parents had died. Harrison proved to be an attentive husband, protective but never controlling, affectionate without being overwhelming. He was fascinated by her teaching, often sitting in the back of the schoolhouse to observe her lessons, offering insights about the natural world that enriched her curriculum. The students came to adore him, especially when he brought in examples of animal tracks in plaster or demonstrated how to make friction fire. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, Harrison carving small wooden animals while Penelope graded papers or read aloud from books. Dorothy would join them, working on her own studies or practicing the piano that came with the house. It was domestic and peaceful, and Penelope had never been happier. Winter eased into spring, and with the warmer weather came a suggestion from Harrison. "I want to take you to the cabin," he said one evening in early April. "Show you where I lived before, where we can spend our summers. School will be out in a month. We could spend a few weeks up there, just the three of us." "I would love that," Penelope said. They made plans carefully, stocking up on supplies and arranging everything for the journey. When the school year finally ended in late May, they set out early one morning, riding 3 horses with 2 pack horses carrying their supplies. Dorothy was nervous about riding so far, but Harrison had chosen the gentlest horse for her and spent the journey teaching her and encouraging her. The ride took a full day, climbing steadily into the mountains along paths that grew increasingly narrow and wild. Penelope saw the landscape Harrison had described coming to life around her. Towering pines, rocky outcrops, meadows thick with wildflowers. Eagles circled overhead, and once they spotted a black bear in the distance, watching them calmly before lumbering into the forest. "It is like another world," Penelope breathed. "Wait until you see the cabin," Harrison said. They arrived in the late afternoon, cresting a ridge to reveal a valley below. A creek ran through it, catching the sunlight, and deer grazed in the tall grass. Nestled against the tree line was Harrison's cabin, exactly as he had described. Sturdy log construction, a stone chimney, a small porch facing the valley. "Oh, Harrison," Penelope whispered, "it is perfect." They settled into the cabin over the following days, falling into new rhythms. Harrison taught them both how to fish in the creek, how to identify edible plants, how to read the signs of weather in the clouds and wind. Penelope discovered she loved the quiet of the mountains, the way the world felt both vast and intimate at once. Dorothy flourished in the mountain air, growing tanned and strong. losing the last of the frightened, thin look she had carried since their parents' death. She and Harrison developed their own relationship, more like father and daughter than brother-in-law and sister-in-law, and Penelope often caught them conspiring together on some small project or joke. At night, Penelope and Harrison would lie together in the loft, listening to the sounds of the forest and talking in quiet voices about their future. It was there, wrapped in her husband's strong arms, that Penelope first suspected she might be pregnant. "Harrison," she whispered one night, "I think I might be carrying a child." He went very still. "Truly, I am not certain yet, but I believe so." Harrison pulled her closer, his hand spreading protectively over her belly. "A child," he said wonderingly, "our child. Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it." He kissed her temple. "I want to give our children everything. Love, security, a home where they feel safe, everything I did not have growing up." "We will," Penelope promised. "Together we will give them everything." By the time they returned to Grass Valley in late July, Penelope was certain. She visited the town doctor, who confirmed she was nearly 3 months along and would likely deliver in February. The news spread through the small town quickly, and Penelope found herself the recipient of advice and well wishes from women she barely knew. Mrs. Chen knitted tiny baby garments. Mr. Morrison set aside a beautiful wooden cradle someone had traded to him. Even Albert Sutherland stopped by to congratulate them and assure Penelope that her position at the school would be waiting for her when she was ready to return after the baby came. "We have built something here," Penelope said to Harrison one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "A real life." "We have," Harrison agreed. His hand rested on her growing belly, feeling the small movements of the baby within. "Sometimes I can barely believe this is real, that I get to have this. You deserve it. You deserve all of it." "So do you, Penelope. Never forget that." Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1878, after a long labor that left Penelope exhausted but triumphant. Harrison had paced the floor downstairs, refusing to leave the house despite the tradition of husbands making themselves scarce during births. The moment the doctor told him he could come up, he took the stairs 3 at a time. Penelope held out the bundle to him. "Meet your son." Harrison took the baby with surprising gentleness for such a large man, cradling the infant against his broad chest. Tears ran unashamedly down his face as he stared at the tiny person they had created. "He is perfect," Harrison whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Henry, after Harrison's grandfather, with the middle name Thomas after Penelope's father. He was a healthy baby with a lusty cry in his father's eyes, already showing hints of that striking gray-blue. Dorothy was smitten with her nephew, helping care for him and singing him lullabies in the evenings. Watching her sister blossom into a confident young woman, no longer thin and frightened but strong and hopeful, Penelope felt her heart swell with gratitude. When spring came and the weather warmed, they packed up again and headed to the mountain cabin, this time with baby Henry swaddled in furs in a specially made carrier. The journey was harder with an infant, requiring more stops and careful planning, but they managed. That summer at the cabin was perhaps the happiest time of Penelope's life. She watched Harrison teaching Dorothy how to track animals while she nursed Henry in the sunshine. She picked wildflowers and pressed them in books, swam in the cold creek on hot afternoons, and fell asleep each night listening to Harrison's heartbeat and the sound of the wind in the pines. "I want to do this every year," she told Harrison. "Summers in the mountains, the rest of the year in town. The best of both worlds." "Then that is what we will do," Harrison promised. "Every year for the rest of our lives." And they did. As the years passed, their family grew. A daughter named Patricia came 2 years after Henry, with dark curls and Penelope's determination. Then another son, James, who was quiet and thoughtful like his mother. Dorothy grew up and eventually married a young lawyer who came to town to set up practice, and they built a house just down the street, keeping the family close. Penelope returned to teaching when each child was old enough, her mother and Mrs. Chen taking turns watching the babies during school hours. Harrison supplemented their income by guiding hunters and prospectors, his knowledge of the mountains making him invaluable. They were never wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. The mountain cabin became a family tradition, a place where they retreated each summer to reconnect with the wild beauty that had brought Harrison peace so many years before. The children grew up knowing how to fish and track, how to read the weather and respect the wilderness. They grew up with stories of how their parents met, of the mountain man who paid for a stranger's groceries and won a heart. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Harrison and Penelope rode up to the cabin alone, leaving the children with Dorothy for a week. They stood on the porch in the evening light, looking out over the valley where deer still grazed and eagles still circled. "You ever regret it?" Harrison asked. "Tying yourself to a rough mountain man instead of someone more cultured, more refined?" Penelope turned to him, this man who had saved her when she needed it most, who had loved her with a steadiness and devotion that never wavered, who had given her a life beyond anything she had imagined possible. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment." "Good." Harrison pulled her close. "Because I intend to keep you for at least another 10 years, maybe longer." "Try forever," Penelope said, smiling against his chest. "Forever it is." Years continued to pass in a blur of school lessons and mountain summers, of watching their children grow and thrive. Henry proved to have his father's size and strength, eventually taking over much of the guiding work. Patricia became a teacher like her mother, fierce and dedicated. James showed an aptitude for art, his sketches of mountain wildlife becoming locally famous. When Harrison's hair turned gray and Penelope noticed her own face showing lines in the mirror, they took stock of their life and found it good. They had built something lasting, not just in their own happiness, but in the family they had created and the community they had become part of. On their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the mountain cabin. Harrison and Penelope, their 3 children now grown, Dorothy and her husband and their 2 sons, and a collection of grandchildren who ran through the meadows and splashed in the creek, just as their parents had. "You did good, Penny," Dorothy said as they sat together on the porch, watching the chaos of family life swirl around them. "Better than good. You built something beautiful." "We built it," Penelope corrected. "All of us together." That night, after everyone had settled down and the children were asleep, Harrison and Penelope walked down to the creek. The moon was full, turning the water silver, and the sounds of the forest surrounded them. "You remember the first time we came here together?" Penelope asked. "How nervous I was about leaving town, about Dorothy, about everything." "I remember. I also remember thinking that I had never seen anyone look more beautiful than you did that first morning, watching the sunrise over the mountains." 25 years, Penelope marveled. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like forever." "Both," Harrison said. "That is how you know it is real." They stood in the moonlight, his arms around her, and Penelope reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. If she had not been desperate that day in Morrison's store, if Harrison had not happened to be there, if he had not been the kind of man who saw someone in need and simply acted without thought for himself. So many small moments that could have gone differently, that could have led to entirely different lives, but they had not. They had led here to this moment, to this life full of love and family and purpose. "Thank you," Penelope said softly. "For what? For seeing me that day, for helping me, for loving me." Harrison tightened his arms around her. "Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a rough mountain man who had no business hoping someone like you would look at him twice." "I would choose you again," Penelope said. "Every time in every life I would choose you. And I would choose you." They held each other as the moon rose higher and the creek sang its eternal song. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would outlast the mountains themselves. Years later, when they were old and their hair had gone fully silver, they still made the trek to the cabin each summer, though they rode more slowly and needed more rest. Their children and grandchildren would visit, filling the valley with laughter and life, but Harrison and Penelope treasured the quiet moments most. "I want to be buried here," Harrison told Penelope one summer evening as they sat on the porch, their aged hands intertwined. "When my time comes. In the meadow where we can see the mountains. Then I will be buried beside you," Penelope said. "We started our life together at a store in town, but this is where our hearts have always been. Together, always together." Harrison died peacefully in his sleep at 78, with Penelope lying beside him in their bed at the townhouse. It was winter, and they could not make the journey to the mountain cabin to bury him, so they laid him to rest in the town cemetery with the promise that come spring, they would place a marker in the mountain meadow as well. Penelope lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still sharp and engaged with the world. She taught part-time at the school almost until the end, claiming that keeping her mind active kept her young. But everyone could see that part of her had gone with Harrison, and she was only waiting for the time when they could be reunited. When she passed at 83, it was peacefully in her sleep, much like her beloved husband. Her children honored both their wishes, taking their ashes to the mountain cabin and scattering them in the meadow where they had spent so many happy summers. A stone marker was placed there, simple and enduring. Harrison Garrett and Penelope Turner Garrett together in life, together in eternity 1846, 1924, and 1854, 1937, the cabin still stands, maintained by their descendants who continue the tradition of summer visits. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren still splash in the creek and explore the forests, carrying on the legacy of love and connection to the wild beauty that their ancestors treasured. And on quiet evenings, when the wind moves through the pines and the creek sings its ancient song, some say you can still feel the presence of the mountain man and his bride, forever watching over the valley they loved, forever together in the place where their hearts had always belonged. The story of how they met, of the merchant who said her credit was no good, and the mountain man who opened an account and told her to buy anything, became family legend. It was told and retold through the generations, a reminder that love can strike in the most unexpected moments, that kindness to strangers can change the course of lives, and that sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances on people and possibilities. Their love story became part of Grass Valley's history, whispered about in the general store that still stood on the same spot where Morrison's had been, remembered by the descendants of the students Penelope had taught. It became a touchstone for what was possible when two people found each other against all odds and chose to build a life together despite the challenges. And perhaps that was the greatest legacy Harrison and Penelope left behind, not just the family they created or the lives they touched, but the proof that true love, the kind that lasts and deepens and grows stronger with every passing year, does exist. That it is worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth every sacrifice and every risk. In the end, they had everything they needed, everything they had ever wanted, Everything they had dared to hope for on that autumn day in 1876, when a mountain man saw a woman in need and did something about it. They had love. They had family. They had a life rich with meaning and connection and joy, and they had each other from that first meeting until their final breath and beyond into whatever came next, together always, just as they had promised. The mountains stood witness to their love, eternal and enduring, a testament to what two people could build when they opened their hearts to possibility and chose to walk through life hand in hand. The story ended as all the best love stories do, not with a dramatic flourish, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, of promises kept and dreams fulfilled, of love that transcended time and circumstance to become something greater than the sum of its parts. It ended with two souls finding their home, not just in a place but in each other, and that made all the difference.